Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, the only organization in Silicon Valley that both starts and ends their events on time, Miss Karen Tucker.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Don Fox. Welcome, everybody. One of the things that binds Churchill audience members together is that we are, most of us, actively engaged in work or in the pursuit of work with a personal intention to support and experience the benefits of innovation and economic growth. And there's so much unfolding now to make that possible with advancing and converging technologies such as AI, the Internet of Things, data analysis, communication and collaboration tools, et cetera. And so we have chosen the new world of work as an overarching theme that we will be developing in the upcoming months and year. And tonight's programs represent two discussions. It's a duet, as we think of it. They represent our kickoff of the new world of work. With each new program, our speakers will be invited to contribute relevant new insights and try to add to the conversation rather than repeating what's out there already. And as always, we ask them kindly to refrain from pitching in any form. We thank Citrix Systems, particularly Stacy St. Louis and Don Fox, for their partnership and hosting us. Thank you so much, Citrix. Today's hashtags are Future of Work and Churchill Club, and you will find additional Twitter codes in your printed programs. Our first discussion will begin now, called The Next Organization, Culture, Technology, and Space. It is to focus on key challenges and opportunities in the people space. Please welcome our speakers, Rishi Vaish, VP Watson Work at IBM, who is stepping in for Inisa as she is unavoidably detained in travel. Lucky to have him here. Steve Wilson, VP of Product for Cloud and IoT at Citrix Systems. And our moderator, we've also asked him to contribute to the discussion as well as he sees fit. Jacob Morgan, respected futurist and author of The Employee Experience Advantage. Please welcome our speakers.
All right, hello everyone.
Hello.
So today, as Karen mentioned, we're going to be looking at some of the human side of work. It's a very important topic, especially as so many of us are focusing and exploring technology. So we're going to be spending a bit of time looking at things around employee experience, culture, technology, physical space. And I think we'll leave the last 15, 20 minutes or so for you guys to ask whatever questions that you want. So as we're going through, and they have no idea what questions I'm going to ask them, by the way. We looked at some broad topics, but the questions are totally not scripted, so they're not going to know anything that's coming their way. But as you hear the discussions and stuff like that, come up with your own questions so that we can debate and discuss and talk about all these things during the last 15 and 20 so minutes of the Q&A. So to get started, it wouldn't be a future of work discussion if we didn't spend a little bit of time talking about AI and automation. And really quick, I'll just chime in with the big disconnect that I'm seeing from a lot of the work that I've been doing in the companies that I've worked with, is that there's a huge disconnect between research versus what's actually going on in the business world. So on the research side, you'll see 47% of jobs are going to be automated. Everyone's screwed. You're not going to have a job. Just buy pitchforks and run for the hills. And on the business side, I interviewed companies, the chief people officer of McDonald's, the chief innovation officer of EY, executives that are running law firms that invest tons of money in AI and automation that are not displacing any workers. Right? So there's a difference between automating a job and displacing a worker. So that's where I see a huge disconnect between research versus what's actually happening. So let me ask you guys, between the AI and automation debate, well, I suppose first we should ask you to introduce yourselves.
Sure.
I totally forgot that. So why don't we start with you, and then we'll get to the question.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. I'm Steve Wilson, and I do cloud and Internet of Things, IoT, here at Citrix. I've been here for 4 years, and before that I was at Oracle, and before that Sun Microsystems.
Rishi Vaish, I work in our collaboration division. I'm responsible for taking some of the IBM Watson technologies and infusing them into the collaboration portfolio. We have a series of new offerings we'll be announcing there as well. So the AI question is actually really close to my heart. I've also spent some time at Oracle, been at IBM before too, and I've kind of alternated between startups and large companies. So I think the smallest company I ever worked for was I was the third person there. So we were literally across a small table coding way back when.
Yeah, and when most people think of automation, obviously Watson is one of the companies that comes up. So what's your guys' perspective on AI and automation? Why don't we start off really broad? Fear it or embrace it? Should we be freaking out or should we be okay with all the things that are happening? Whoever wants to start.
I think you have to embrace it, right? It's like any new technology. There are going to be requirements around it where you're going to have to figure out where it should be used and where it shouldn't be. But there's no doubt that it's incredibly powerful and that we're starting to see the possibilities of that happening. There's no way to stop it, so you might as well embrace it.
Yeah, I completely agree with the fact that we have to embrace it. I mean, it's like embrace maybe it's like a train coming down and you're in its path. But I don't think we've had technology shifts before too, and one way of looking at it, technology doesn't replace jobs. It might replace a profession. If somebody was doing something in an extremely automated manner, and we took a person and tried to turn them into an automaton, and then we sort of measure that as a job. That kind of automation will get taken over. But then I think the people get freed up to to pursue kind of higher level pursuits. Places where I think human intelligence really can contribute to the job instead of sort of taking a person and forcing them into a given role. So that's why I don't think it's something to fear. I think much like any other technology, it has potential for misuse. But I think being responsible about it is the way I look at it.
Maybe quick show of hands, we can see how many people here think we should be more fearful or maybe vigilant of AI? Okay, couple people. And how many people think we should just be more open-minded, embrace it, everything will be fine, we'll find new jobs? Okay, so the majority of us, or the majority of people are optimistic, it sounds like. But what about the people that are fearful? The ones that are saying, well, look, a couple years ago, technology couldn't do any of the stuff that it's doing now. Now it's beating people in Go. Now we have Watson that's working with doctors and lawyers. And how could drivers and Elon Musk with his driverless truck and driverless cars, so many jobs are going to be displaced. How can you not be fearful?
So I'll take this one first, if you don't mind, Steve. And you mentioned Watson and health, so I'll use that as an example. The first thing I'll say is, as a practitioner in the field, and how many practitioners here in the audience that do machine learning as part of their sort of jobs? So a few. It is really hard. Okay, it is not simple to solve. Some of these, even the simple problems, are actually pretty hard to solve. So I think that's thing one. But in that Watson health example, what we're really doing there is curating knowledge in a way that experts can better treat a patient. One of the things we do is actually ingest research papers. If you can imagine a busy doctor that you might visit, and they may have a capacity for digesting one or two papers in a given evening. Maybe best case 10 a month if they're rigorous about it. A machine can ingest 500,000 in an hour and make something meaningful out of it. And it can match it with the vast amount of data that exists about patients. And if that results in a better outcome for any one of those patients, that's actually really worthwhile. And all of the experts that we've interacted with kind of like the fact that we augment what they do with the ultimate aim of sort of helping someone. And I think when you view AI through that lens of the A being augmented intelligence, so you're augmenting the intelligence of human beings, I think it changes the kind of conversation you can have about AI.
So again, I'm in the camp of we should embrace this, but I don't think you should candy coat it, right? Take the medical example, right? A few years from now, we're going to have automated radiologists, and there's going to be a lot of radiologists with medical degrees that don't have jobs anymore, need to find new jobs. And that's an abstract one that's been floating around, but I was talking to somebody who works at a medical device manufacturer, and they have a bunch of highly paid clinicians that look at the data that come out of those devices and diagnose things based on it. And he said they've been working with a research group doing AI to say, could I spot those things? And the AI is better than the doctors now. So absolutely, this will augment a set of jobs. And I have my own things that I'm looking at in that space. But it will replace jobs too, just like any of the other kind of automation technologies that have come over time.
Or you think enough new ones will be created to keep sort of a massive unemployment?
I don't know that that's the case. I think that over time, talk 20, 30, 50 years, I think the economy is going to change a lot. I think, you're going to get to the point where, a few hundred years ago, everybody worked because you were subsistence farmers. Now they're not that, and the jobs you have are much different. It's going to be a much different set of jobs, and maybe some people have to work and maybe some people don't. And we'll kind of cross that bridge as we come to it.
All right, and the last sort of AI automation question before we move on. What would it actually take to create this kind of a jobs apocalypse? So if you were responsible for engineering a jobs apocalypse, what would it look like? What actually has to happen for massive unemployment, for 47% of jobs to be automated? What needs to happen for that to actually become reality?
Yeah, that's what needs to happen for 47. So, one interesting way of looking at this is how much of the world have we digitized today? We here in the Silicon Valley, I think we live on one extreme edge of the spectrum. I grew up in India. I still have, community there that, lives in rural India. And, yes, there's mobile there as well, but, by no stretch of the imagination is every single aspect of just survival there digitized to the point where you could even think about automating it. So I think for us to lose like 47% of the jobs that we do today, we would have to be living in a world where, the level of digitization has grown. We haven't sort of, replaced, the functions that, all of the functions that people do today, have been completely replaced. And I think that only exists in science fiction. Like, I don't think that's actually, anything close to passing today. I think that's one aspect of it. The other one is, as I was telling you, these systems are really hard to build. One of the hardest things about them is actually not being able to explain why a given machine learning system behaves in the way that it does. And that, what makes us intelligent is, one of the things that makes us intelligent is being able to explain, why we do something. And I don't think we're anywhere close to solving, that part of the puzzle either. So, what it would take is for those problems to get solved and for just massive digitization everywhere. But if you look at the globe, I don't see that as a sort of a near-term problem.
I think you got to look at time frames. If you look at 100 years in the future, I think you have to come up with a scenario that does not cause massive unemployment, but that just might be called increased leisure time. And you got to decide whether that's a pro or a con. If you look
Nice, happy way to look at it.
Yeah.
You're not unemployed. You just got more time to do what you want.
Yeah. Because maybe, by the time the machines are doing all the work, you have all your needs provided for you. But in the next 10 years, honestly, if you want to talk about creating a jobs apocalypse, it's more likely that the Wall Street traders get too dependent on some piece of AI they don't understand and they crash the economy. And I'd say that's an outcome that's more likely.
Take your money out of the stock market now is what you're saying. Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's switch a little bit now to the human aspect. I want to talk a little bit about corporate culture. So in this world of AI and automation and technology that we're talking about, obviously corporate culture is crucial, right? How do we create more human organizations where people actually want to show up? So maybe you guys can talk about the importance of corporate culture, and what do you think companies need to do to create more of that human organization?
Yeah, So yeah, company culture is super important to not just to retain employees who happen to be there, but to attract new talent as well. Yeah, I think before you can answer the sort of, what does company culture need to evolve to, there's also kind of a trend of what people want out of, jobs. And again, you look at the globe as a spectrum, and there's third world countries, first world countries. We're still talking first world kind of problems here. I've found that much more now, and I won't make this a generational argument because I don't think it's just generational. People have stopped putting value on sort of accumulating assets. They sort of shifted to accumulating experiences. And I don't just mean like job experiences, I mean life experiences. And so if you look at the world through that lens and you say, look, most of the people that are going to work for me are looking to accumulate experiences, then you have to set up a company culture where you promote the accumulation of those experiences. So it means a lot more flexibility than you ever had in the past. People like to believe in the mission of the organization that they're working for. So you need to have a macro sort of mission. You need to have a micro vision for the team that person is working in. And you really need to adapt the culture to understanding that this is fluid, it's going to keep changing. And I think as I project out in time, that's how I see company culture evolving, to be much more fluid, more mission-based and embracing of this accumulation of experiences versus accumulation of just assets.
So one question on that before you jump in. So when you say accumulation of experiences, like what sort of experiences? Like what would be an example of a experience that you might accumulate?
So so if I looked at the lens of accumulating assets, you want to buy your first car, you want to buy your first house, and so you set up your corporate sort of structure such that you can reward employees along that scale. An alternate might be, I would like to work in 6 different countries and perform a job function in different geographies. That's a very different lens. You won't buy a house, you won't buy a car because those will. And if you can set up an organization where you make the accumulation of that experience possible, I think you'll attract that kind of employee. So that's an example of a life experience versus a sort of asset accumulation.
Yeah, great example.
Well, from a culture perspective, it's interesting because during the 4 years that I've been here at Citrix, there's been a kind of a big shift. And when I came here, we had a CEO who'd been the CEO for 15 plus years. And the culture was very much a personality-driven culture from the top down. And he had a certain personality and he infused it into the whole company. And when he left, we got a new CEO who came into something of a vacuum and actually kind of realized he needed to establish a culture identity for the company. And he actually spent a lot of time talking to both executives and individuals at the company around what are you interested in from a culture perspective? What are the values that the company should have? And we came up with a core set of 5, but I think a couple of them were interesting. And one of them that I think really goes to sort of the future of work was we put in curiosity as a core component of what everybody's expected to do. And much more embracing a culture of experimenting, risk-taking, and from that really took that and moved it out into a number of places in the company to make it more actionable, where we've put in place hackathons and tech fairs and all these kind of things where we kind of put that in reality and give places for people to attach to those core values and try to express them. And those were values that weren't plucked out of thin air. They kind of came out of people saying, I want to do new things, I want to get new skills, I want to have new experiences. And so if you can infuse those things into your culture and make them part of what you do, you may have to jumpstart them, but then they actually start to feed on themselves.
Interesting. So just to give people some context around why culture, technology, and physical space, at least the research that I've seen seems to point that those are the 3 environments that shape all experiences for all employees: culture, technology, and physical space. And the research that I did found that culture is around 40% of the overall experience, physical space and technology each contribute around 30% of the experience. So that's kind of why we're looking at all 3 of those areas and how those can impact the overall experience for employees. All right, so we talked a little bit about corporate culture. Why don't we shift gears a little bit and look at the physical space. And then maybe we'll jump back to culture. So looking at the physical space, obviously, and I'm sure a lot of people here, especially in the Bay Area, can relate to a lot of the debates and the discussions that we're having around space. Open versus closed, flexible work versus come into work. Our office is even going to disappear. When you guys look at the future of work and how things are changing, and even your own respective organizations, what role does the physical space play towards shaping experiences?
So I'll tell you a little story, a very personal story from what we've been doing here is we have these two Citrix buildings right here, and we were talking about doing a pretty major overhaul on the building next door. And there was a hot debate about, go open floor plan or closed offices or cubes. And we said, hey, we have offices all around the world. What do we have that works? And somebody chimes up and says, hey, we just redid these floors in Florida. We redid 2 floors. We did them with this open floor plan. It's really awesome. Everybody loves it. People went and took tours, and they saw how much everybody loved it. But they still, the people here are like, no, I don't want an open floor plan. I'm a programmer. I work by myself. I need walls. And so we said, let's do a survey of all the developers at the company, and find out what floor they're on, what kind of plan they're in. Do they like it? Do they not like it? What do they like about it? And it was fascinating, the results that came back. First, that floor that everybody thought was really cool actually came back as the highest rated floor. So everyone's like, open floor plan, this is the answer, we're moving to that. And they said, but what about the floor right below it that we didn't go visit that's on the same floor plan? Almost the lowest rated floor on.
But it's the same floor plan.
Same floor plan. So we said, well, what did that mean? So we had to kind of go dig into that. And, well, there's 2 different teams on those 2 different floors working on different kinds of things. And one of them was working on a very set of forward-looking, next-gen products. They loved the idea of being open and running around and collaborating. The other guys are working on mostly fixing bugs on a set of existing products. And they're like, I just need to focus on what I'm doing. So there was no magic bullet there that we could say we redo every office in the company and that this is the gold standard. It just doesn't work that way. And we brought in some people to help with statistics and analysis on all the data we got from these surveys. And you know what? The strongest statistically significant correlation they found to whether somebody would favor one space over another is whether it was the same as the one they were in. If I'm in a closed floor plan, I want a closed floor plan. If I'm in an open floor plan, and so there was just a huge amount of please don't move my cheese. So I think space actually is really important, but there's no magic bullet. There is no way to just say open floor plan is the future or I need my offices. It's much more subtle and complicated than that.
So what did you guys decide? What's going to be the overhaul here?
I think we are going to go for sort of a more open floor plan with some of these things, but there's a lot of talk about how do you give people the space that they need when you need to go off.
Diverse floor plans.
Yeah, so I think you've got to kind of look at these things as a mixture. Again, it just can't be cookie cutter.
So you said, so I think the part of the answer we found at least is move my cheese, which means if you have the ability to adapt your floor plan, we've done this in some of our design studios very successfully. Just a bit of history there maybe. So we instituted design as a formal discipline at IBM some time ago, maybe a few years ago. And that's a highly collaborative sort of discipline. And so we've actually set up spaces where you can reconfigure them very easily. And you can even set up walls, like mobile walls and all that too. So you could create some privacy if you wanted to, but if you wanted to open it up, you could. And for that kind of job, that does seem to work really well. But again, back to there isn't a one size fits all. There's even phases of projects that you go through where sometimes it is important for even those people fixing bugs to be around the same table at the same time. And sometimes you just need, in the creative cycle especially, people need some space to be creative and quiet. Makes a lot of sense then. I think the key theme from all of that is flexibility. If you're thinking about redoing space, we've redone a few buildings ourselves. It's making sure that there's enough enough of these flexible spaces for your employees, because it certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all at all. And then there's the aspect of mobility too. In the Bay Area, if you happen to have an employee that needs some quiet space, should they even waste an hour, making their way into work that day, or not? I think that's a question to be answered. So if you can set that up flexibly, I think you stand in probably the best shot at success.
I love that you mentioned data, because I think a lot of organizations get very caught up on what Google and Netflix and Amazon are doing. They very much want to copy these Bay Area companies, which, by the way, have their own problems. And they don't spend enough time doing research, right? They look at maybe third-party reports, they look at what another company did, but they don't turn that research arm inward to find out what the employees actually care about. And in your case, that proved actually, you could spend millions of dollars redesigning a space, and if you don't have the data around it, you find out, why don't these employees love it? We created this amazing floor plan for them. So the data aspect, I think, is absolutely crucial. What about, and this is one of the things that sometimes I hear pushback around, isn't this expensive? It's so much money to redesign a physical space. It's so much money to hire architects and work with these design firms. Why even bother doing it? Is it worth making those investments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I would have to answer in the affirmative. It's always worth making those investments. The needs of employees change over time. If you set up a building, we have buildings that have been around for like decades. You need to change the configuration to adapt to the changing needs of the workforce. Even simple things like the kinds of communication devices you have in conference rooms, for example. You want to leverage the latest and greatest, and yeah, that's expensive, but the ROI is huge.
You don't want to come into a conference room with those like projectors with the transparent screens and the Sharpie either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, there is a need to redesign the space. Now, how much research you put into it, I think the point that you brought, that is critical. Understand who you're redesigning the space for. If you're setting up a beautiful space like this, and you want customers to come in and experience your company, you need to deliver that experience to them in some place, and that's an investment that's worth it.
Yeah.
Your employees, work there every day. You need to design an experience that's, good for those employees.
Yeah, spend as much time almost at the office as we do at home, so.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to look at the cost equation, and one of them is those 2 floors that we redid that we're sort of using as a model now, but that was expensive to do, and we spent a lot of time with designers and different furniture companies but in essence what we actually did was we moved out of one whole building by increasing the density by over 50% compared to what everyone had a hard-walled office at the old building, which is why they were afraid of moving to open floor plan, because it was different spot for your cheese. But in essence, we actually had to do an outlay at the beginning, but we had an ongoing cost savings for that for a long time. But maybe even from a more practical perspective, we acquired a little startup a couple years ago, and they were the kind of startup that literally, they had one big room that they lived in, and they had a bunch of tables, and they just existed without walls or cubes. And when they moved here, we put them in a cube farm, and they freaked out. They're like, this is the worst, horrible corporate nightmare. I feel like Dilbert. And so we went to the space guys. We said, we need to redo this. And they said, there's no money. And they just shut the door in my face. So we looked around, and I got a bunch of crafty engineers, and we went and got screwdrivers, and we took the cube heights all down by half. We rearranged them from single cubes into pens that held 6 or 8 engineers each, and lowered them all. And little bit of craftiness, and it completely changed the whole dynamic. And we did it in 2 days and spent nothing.
Huh.
So sometimes there's just a certain amount of creativity you can put into these things.
Yeah, go to IKEA, spend $500.
You really can.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Put a yellow couch there and some fiber optic lights, and all of a sudden, you think you're working at Google.
Exactly. All right, so we have a couple minutes left before we open it up to audience Q&A. So let's spend a couple of minutes looking at technology and the impact that plays on employee experience. And I'm not talking about like the specifically the AI and automation piece, but just in terms of the tools that employees use to get their jobs done, why that's so important, and what areas or what tools and technologies of the future are you guys paying attention to that you think are going to become integral to how we work?
Well, so, maybe I kick that off. So I worked for our collaboration division. And so we've spent a good amount of time just understanding what the landscape looks like to then project forward. And we've kind of broken this down into 3 sort of waves. Wave 1, we've sort of classified as a productivity wave. And we've got products that date back decades that could have fit into that wave. Think about desktops came out, you need to put stuff on them, and that was sort of phase 1. Then was sort of engagement. So you need to build systems where people can engage one another. And I'd argue that wave is still pretty active today. I mean, all of us probably use some form of messaging that allows us to engage inside the company and outside the company. And in the next wave, you said look out a little bit, is really applying learning and intelligence to the data that you've got in those systems because they happen to be digitized, and find ways to, because what these technologies have done is kind of interrupt our daily lives, create noise, they've created information overload. And so it's really, solving those kinds of problems, that we see as that next wave of collaboration technologies is, understand what's going on in these streams, don't just provide the streams, and then curate the content in the streams to be able to deliver insights and relevant information kind of at the right time to people. So that's sort of how we view, the technology and collaboration as solving that problem.
Yeah. I think the first thing that we look at right now is you're going to have a very different set of devices that you use to access your work on a daily basis. You go back not a lot of years, and the only question when you showed up is, do you want a PC or a Mac?
Yeah.
And that was, after that, I'm going to pour a bunch of software into it, and that's going to be where you do your work. As more and more of our data and our applications start to come from the cloud, they become more mobile. It's not just that you can access them from a mobile phone, although now you can access them from your phone or a tablet, so you got a different set of devices. There's an increasing number of IoT devices. This little thing's called a Raspberry Pi. Cost on it's about $5. This does everything that your PC used to do. You could hook up keyboard and a mouse and a monitor to it and use it as your computer. You could also use it as an embedded device, hide it under your desk, and attach it to speech recognition, voice recognition, virtual reality, augmented reality. So there's going to be all of these. There's going to be a proliferation of devices that are going to help you access your information for work. They're going to be everywhere in your environment. They're going to create a huge amount of telemetry where, as a company, you can use that to understand the patterns of your workers. What are they working on? Where are they working? For your physical space, you'll understand what spaces are being used, which ones aren't. So I think there's going to be an explosion in the number of devices and the places these devices are. But as a worker, I'm strapped down to this much less than I used to be. I don't have to come to that desk and do work. Maybe in the past I did have a desk at home and I had a desk at the office, but it's even going past that. And we've been working with companies now, sort of partnering with very strange partners for a software company, where we've been partnering with people like furniture companies like Steelcase. And they build cool cubes where your admin can move from one cube and go over to a privacy station to do something. Well, it's like, if she's going to go over there, work has to move with her. And so you have to move all of those applications and data to the cloud so you can move them around.
Interesting.
Maybe just one dimension to add to the sort of the devices, and we certainly see this as an even bigger trend in the future. Just to talk from personal experience. So I have 2 kids, one in high school now and one in middle school. When my high schooler was a toddler, the only way she had to interface with technology was the keyboard. We had to teach her kind of typing, and that's how you got commands in. By the time my now middle schooler, when she was a toddler, it was touch. Her expectation was touch. Well, I don't have a third kid, but I have they have some younger cousins. They just talk. I mean, their expectation is the first thing they want to do is talk to a device. Now, we're still not used to talking to devices. I'm certainly not. When I talk to a device, changed my tone, I changed my accent a bit. I'm much more formal with it. But think about this generation, being at work, maybe like 5, 7, 10 years from now. I mean, the expectation of what technology will do is just going to be different. So speech and natural language understanding, really critical, element of, I think, all forms of technology moving forward.
And are there any specific technology trends that you're paying attention to versus ones that you think are overhyped? So for example, wearables, IoT, things like Amazon Alexa. Which ones do you think are worth paying attention to now, and which ones do you think are maybe a little bit overhyped that still need a couple of years before we really start making investments in them?
So I think voice is one where I believe there's investment going on today. If you try to solve the problem globally, it's still a tough problem to solve. Languages, accents. I have so many people from so many different nationalities on my team. And we do voice experiments, and we're still not really good at understanding all the accents. Mine included sometimes. So there's some unsolved problems there, but I think voice is a huge one. One of the technologies that shows promise, but I think is still on the early side, is AR, VR. There's a lot of interesting use cases for augmented reality, but in the general workspace, I really would like to be in a room, like this one, but have some of you folks be in a different continent maybe. And we seem to be getting closer there, but that's one that I think will help that bridge some of that work gap a little more closely. So on the horizon.
A little bit more on the fringes. Okay.
Yeah.
Rob, for you?
I mean, I agree with you on speech. I feel it's not there yet, but we've reached this inflection point where it's getting so much better at such a rate that it's very usable for a set of tasks today, and it's about to knee over as people figure out the applications for it. There's a whole bunch of startups out there that just specialize in building bots now, which are not physical robots, but they're chat bots. And you can put voice in front of that or type commands or text messages to it. But that natural language interaction, frankly, whether it's typing or talking, is going to be very transformative. And you think about, back in the day, people actually used to like to use DOS instead of a Mac because you could do things very compactly with a small set of text commands. But the problem is you had to remember all the commands. If you can just talk to things in natural language, if you can say, rename all the files that start with the letter Q and do this, and that gets automated for you, that's going to become tremendously powerful. And so that combination of some of those AI technologies, wrapped around voice, I think will be really, really big.
Yeah. All right, last two questions before we open it up to Q&A. The first one is, how do we deal with all this disruptive change that's happening? I mean, a lot of the people here work for organizations, and they're trying to figure out, man, there's so many new technologies that are coming our way. We got to think of physical space, multi-generation workers. We got new technologies. By the time we invest in something else is coming out. How do we just kind of keep our heads above water and avoid not drowning in this massively, rapidly changing world that we're all living and working in? And can we? Maybe we can't.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I don't think we can solve that problem, for anyone. I think you have to expect that there's going to be several generations of technology, in play at the same time. And I think the best answer that at least we found is build adaptive teams, small teams with missions, and sort of use the spectrum, of what you've got. But recognize the fact that there is going to be diversity. I don't think you can avoid it. You don't want to avoid the new technologies. You want to bring them in as quickly as possible because they can deliver a lot of value to your businesses. So,
yeah, I mean, I think from a personal perspective and from an organizational perspective, you want to put a lot of value on learning. And from an organizational perspective, how do you create a learning organization that sees it as a value of how do I embrace these things that are new? How do I learn to adopt them? How do I figure out which ones are valuable and which ones aren't, but not be afraid to experiment with those, be curious about these new technologies, embrace them, make that part of your workplace environment. And sometimes people get frustrated with these things. Crazy new thing. That's all right. If that one doesn't work, take it out, put in a new one.
Yeah.
But I think, especially, we all live in Silicon Valley. People like the idea of being out on the front of these things, so I think you can embrace it. It doesn't have to come with a huge amount of cost, right? These technologies are actually so ubiquitously available. You get an Amazon Alexa for $50 and learn to write skills on it for nothing. So a small amount of effort from your IT team or your software developers, and you can be really involved in this next gen wave of what's coming, no matter what business you're in.
Yeah, I always like to say, think like a laboratory and less like a factory. So
There you go.
I think that's a good way to think about that. And last question before we jump into all of your questions. What do we do to prepare? And I don't mean on the organizational level, but for us as individuals, as employees, as people who have careers, maybe even our kids, what do we need to know to be successful in this rapidly changing world? How do we make sure that we have a career, that we have a job, that we can be successful?
Yeah, I think part of the answer was the word learning. I think the best skill that at least I'm trying to teach my kids today is teaching them how to learn and training them with the fact that they're not going to be done with this in school or college. This is going to be a constant for them, throughout life. Teach people how to learn, and I think that applies to all employees. There used to be a time when you would sort of ascend a career ladder at work, and there was some cachet and some sort of stability in doing that. But today, I think that doesn't exist. You have to be curious, you have to learn, you have to be willing to embrace what's new and sort of continually teach yourself. And I think for organizations, we've certainly done this internally at IBM too. Give people the time and space to learn. I go back to that. If you're trying to get people to curate experiences, those experiences are going to need different skills. And we give people time to actually learn new skills. Not just on the job, but even on the side. I think that learning is super important.
I think if you look at the spectrum of jobs that are likely to be automated on different time scales, I think jobs, obviously, that are more creative are the ones that are probably going to be the last to possibly be automated. And so looking at curiosity and creativity as foremost in what you do. Frankly, people skills, right? It's the last thing the machines would ever understand is how to really deal with a person. And it's something that when you look at our kids today and the educational culture out there, you see parts of the education culture that are being driven more and more by, I got to teach the kids more math.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know that that's going to help you. I want to teach you logic. I want to teach you problem solving, but I don't know that you having the quadratic equation memorized is going to help you in a world where we have increasing compute power in the cloud and artificial intelligence. So I think from an educational system perspective, we've got to look at teaching people more of those soft skills. How do you deal with people? How do you deal with creativity? How do you solve problems? And less, how do we memorize facts that I can look up with Siri on my phone? And how do I, remember how to solve all these math equations, which I can have somebody else do for me?
Yeah, knowledge is the biggest commodity, right? To stand out, you gotta learn how to learn. I like that. All right, let's open it up to your questions. I see we have one back there already. Okay, we have a bunch, so let's start over there.
Wonderful discussion, thank you. Jeff Saperstein and I have been teaching in the State University, San Francisco State, the business school, communication school, also a career transition coach. So my question goes to the first question that you asked of what could go wrong. I don't think it's a question of, 47% of the jobs are going to be displaced. Neither the governments nor the educational institutions have anywhere caught up with whatever it is that are going to be necessary for people to adjust to a quickly evolving, not a 20-year or a 30-year evolution, a quickly evolving change, not only in the nature of work, but in the nature of organizations. So let's take IBM. The average tenure now is about 5 years among the 30-year-olds at IBM. It used to be 20. 426,000 employees stated that they want to get down to about 200,000. for most, and they're one of the best, obviously. So one of the problems is organizations really, with a tenure of 2 years for the average employee and using more and more contract employees, organizations are failing society. Government is failing society. And it's not intentional, it's just happening. And Vinod Khosla, I'll leave this, Vinod Khosla said that democracy gives capitalism the right to exist. So the question really is, with all of this happening with the institutions, the organizations, we have regions that are going to be failing, not in California necessarily here, but maybe in Bakersfield and Fresno, where they're not going to be learning the way you guys are talking about it. What's our responsibility? What's our responsibility with the transparency of data? Who's designing the data? Who keeps the data? Who uses the data? And if I'm going to use data with intelligence tests to determine who gets into jobs or other criteria, this is a world that's untethered from what we traditionally had in terms of a certainty. So there's a lack of certainty, a failure of organizations, failure of government, failure of universities, and a real concern that the tech companies really are not taking responsibility in the same way that Facebook and Twitter doesn't take responsibility for hate or fake news because they looked at themselves like the telephone. We're not responsible for content. We're responsible to just do the algorithm. That's a long comment, but it goes back to what you were talking about, Jacob. It's not just, hey, does everybody believe that this is going to be wonderful or terrible? We've got some really serious issues that the sectors, such as the private sector and the corporate sector, really have to take more responsibility to help the other organizations and regions to come up to speed, or we're in serious trouble because they're not going to let us do what you guys want us to do. That's my
Simple question. Simple question. All right. Well, I'll share my thoughts, and we'll jump over to you. Oh man, there's so many things that you can say there.
There's many dimensions.
Yeah, there are many dimensions. I'll start just very, very high level, and then maybe you guys can narrow down. So I've talked to a lot of governments. I've talked to a lot of people in the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. Man, they're decades behind. You should see some of the links that these government officials send me for where they access resources. It literally looks like it was built in the 70s. So they're very behind. I think the bigger problem for a lot of these companies is how they think. And I always like to say, think like a futurist, right? Because when futurists are taught, right, if you go to a class and do a certification around it, they always teach you to think in scenarios. And they always teach you to think in different time horizons. They teach you to think around alternatives. And I think most businesses are very obsessed with focusing on short term and one future. And when you think short term and you think one future, you miss a lot. And if you're wrong, you're in trouble. So I think there's a big challenge in how organizations actually think. Now, in our personal lives, we actually do a pretty good job of this. In our personal lives, right, when you want to buy a house somewhere, when you're thinking of having a kid, you think, what's my property value going to be? What school is my kid going to go to? What do I want them to be when they grow up? What should they be studying? When should they go to daycare? Like, you think about scenarios and alternatives in your head. And for some reason, when we get inside of our corporations, all of this sort of scenario and multi-horizon thinking goes out the window. And it's like, okay, we got to make our numbers next quarter. Automation, we heard what the White House said, right? They're not worried about it for the next 50 to 100 years, which, in 50 to 100 years, I mean, you tell me what it's going to look like, right?
That means not my problem.
Yeah, exactly, not my problem. So that's part of it. I think we need to change the way we think. I think second is, and we touched on this, is there's much more accountability in the hands of us as individuals to teach ourselves the things that we need to know to be successful, right? Learning how to learn, taking classes online, going to sites like Teachable and Skillshare and Coursera. I know that there are, some organizations are stepping up. So Evian automated thousands, I think it was 1,000 jobs in the Alps. And all of the people that were technicians were retrained from bottling water to managing and piloting remote shuttles, right? So there are some companies like that, some companies like Accenture, where they automated 10,000 jobs but didn't replace a single human because they retrained them and upskilled them. So some companies are doing a good job. But I think it's naive as us as individuals to think that our companies are going to take care. and just protect us and look after us. The first thing that a company does when there's a problem is look at numbers, and they cut you. And so in that kind of a world, you need to be prepared that you are going to look out for you. And only you can teach yourself the skills that you need to be successful. So my perspective is companies need to think differently, and employees need to be more accountable and be prepared for a pretty cutthroat world. Maybe you guys want to...
I'll just add one thing to what you said about the ability to go out there and get, these online courses and things, which you can do. You want to go learn about machine learning, you could pay like $10 on udemy.com.
That's free, actually,
and get like an 80-hour course on this. But I'll just give a very personal example that flabbergasted me recently, which is I have a teenage daughter, and I bought her sister a keyboard, like musical keyboard a few years ago that she never bonded with, and it was just collecting dust. And I walked home one day, and I walk in, and my daughter is playing piano. And I'm like, what? Where did this come from? You've never taken a piano lesson. And she's got her phone propped up on the piano, and she's going, I'm watching YouTube, and I'm figuring it out. And she's basically just go and do your own piano lessons on YouTube for free, and she's taught herself how to play piano.
Yeah,
and so this
amazing.
is the flip side of all of this, change of stuff coming at you is that the resources are out there where you can learn to do anything you want and attack these problems too. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah, I think the only dimension I'll add, corporations and corporations have to evolve too, through this transition. It's not, it's hard enough for one human being to sort of understand and evolve. A corporation of some scale, the problem is compounded. And I think if I look back in history, because we can't look into the future too clearly, but at IBM we've gone through a few of these sort of technology shifts over time, and I believe we've got the elements of how to make an organization navigate a shift like this in place. So, but I think every organization is going to be confronted with a challenge like that.
Yep. Next question. Wherever.
Hello. I want to get your perspective about the impact of globalization. Given that it's becoming more of a knowledge culture, and it's the effect of digitization. So now it may not affect everybody, but follow my short, summarized thought process. As we get more and more into an economy that's data-driven and knowledge-driven, a lot of these things are now going to be dependent upon skilled workers who are doing interactive things with other people. And so knowledge goes across the globe. Decisions have to be made not perhaps locally, but in collaboration with more and more people around the globe. So 10 years ago, for example, I just had to deal with India, even though they're 12 hours away. Now it's Turkey, and so how's that affect the future worker, right? I think before it might be very specialized, high-level managers have to deal with this, but I see the effect trickling downward. How about your perspective?
And you guys are big global
Yeah.
companies, both of you, so
Yeah.
how do you guys deal with that?
So I think that the trend you see is absolute, right? In the old days, when you talked about offshoring something, you had to move like a plant, and that involved taking the product of that and putting it on a boat and shipping it somewhere. So it was much harder to think about that. Today, in the world of software, software is one of the first things to get outsourced, and we talk about that all the time. And certainly every large software company in the world does development all over the world, right? We do it here, but we also do it in India, and we do it in China, and we do it in Eastern Europe. And frankly, there's a huge business that goes into creating the tools that allow people to collaborate over those kind of distance and time zones and everything like that. And actually, the world of a software developer is much different than it used to be because of that need to collaborate. The systems that we build are not these small monolithic systems that Steve Wozniak can just hover over for 6 months and build a thing, right? Nothing gets built like that anymore. They're built by global teams. They're built at scale. They're built by hundreds or more of developers, and so even the software developers need to have more social skills of various types, and it becomes increasingly important. And so it's not just the managers that need to learn how to interact across those borders. It's absolutely all the way down
Cultures,
to the leaf
languages.
nodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and the only thing I'll add to that is, I mean, this isn't, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. The first time I got acquired in IBM 2010, the thing that struck me was, I mean, instantly I had access to like teams across the globe, not just the teams that would help me build my product, but that would help me sell it as well. So I think collaboration technology there has only gotten better. I think it is going to get even better over time. We're going to have AI help us solve some of the problems that we haven't been able to solve now. So I think you should expect globalization in large companies, and it's not a new problem. Yeah.
Next question, wherever the mic is back there.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. I just wanted to ask you to expand on one of your earlier comments about offering the value of accumulating experiences and thinking about this perspective of working for some time in a financial setting, in a project management setting, et cetera. You're basically creating a lot of generalists, which is great if you can also teach the social skills and so forth. What aspect of your HR team needs to catch up, though? Because the HR teams still look for specialists. When you're looking to fill those teams, the descriptions are written that way, the way to find the jobs is written that way, and just thinking about like what are the networking pieces. So if the overall total number of jobs are shrinking and you're getting more generalists, but you're recruiting for specialists, are you moving kind of in opposite directions there?
So accumulating experiences doesn't mean creating generalists. The way I see the modern worker, folks that I speak to, they want experiences in their life, and they want me as their sort of manager/employer to help support them through that. This doesn't mean that they have to change disciplines. If you happen to be a C# programmer and that's what you want to do, that's awesome. But today you may want to do that in California. Tomorrow you might want to try that in New York. Day after tomorrow you might want to try that in our Dublin lab. After that you might want to move to China for a while. I can help you kind of get that experience. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Maybe your question was a different one.
But do you want them to have different experiences? Like, not just be the C# programmer, but to also be a product developer or, cross-training. That was a little bit more of my question. Sorry if I'm,
Yeah, I think that's up to the individual. There are people that enjoy different disciplines. There are people that enjoy specialization. I don't think there's a prescription there. It's really understanding what an individual wants and being able to curate, what they'd like to do. Actually, something really interesting, along those lines. A lot of people think they want to be a manager, and by manager I mean, I want to be like a VP. And so we have a program where you can shadow an executive and sort of watch them do their job. This is remarkable. I mean, I've not come across this in other companies in my past. This is kind of, I thought this was amazing. And you'll find that people sit in and when they discover what you actually have to do, they really don't want to do it on that regular a basis. They're like, okay, I got my taste of what this looks like. So that's what I mean by providing experiences to people. And then for some people, they're like, wow, this is awesome. I really want that challenge, and then you can give it to them.
The analogy I like to use is think like a taste tester, right? So how do you figure out what your favorite food is? You got to try different foods. And I think organizations need to think of themselves a little bit as they have a buffet, and they are going to encourage their employees to be more like taste testers to help them figure out what they like, what they're good at, and once they find something that they like and what they're good at, we're going to give you a lot of it, right? We're going to make sure that that's what you love. And if you stop liking that and you want something else, we're going to try to create that nimble and agile environment. The problem I think you outlined is one that HR sees quite frequently, is that HR is consistently viewed as a team and a department that needs to be there because it has to be there. It's about legal and policies and regulations. They're not typically seen as a department that's responsible for empowering the organization, for shaping the future of work. They're there because if we don't have them there, the lawyers are going to get mad at us. And it's a big shift to move away from compliance to a strategic partner. And I think that's the big direction that we're moving away from. And in fact, even a lot of companies are renaming HR, right? They're shifting towards talent, towards people. It's not just the naming conventions that are crucial, but it's how they think about themselves. And I think moving away from compliance and you only come here when you're hired or fired to we are going to help shape and build this organization and transform it and think of culture, technology, and physical space and partner with different teams and regions. I think that's ultimately where we're going, for HR at least. Next question.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. My name is Jayan. My question is related with automation and IoT. Once we have so much of automation everywhere and then also so many devices on the internet, IoT, security is very important for all these devices and automations. So are we ready with for that security, and what is your thought on that?
So good question, especially with the recent hacking things we've been hearing about.
So, I mean, security is not just the biggest issue in IoT today, it's the biggest issue in business, full stop. And when I go talk to enterprises out there, it's the top of everyone's list because it's the thing that you get fired for, not only the CIO, the CEO, right? I mean, the guy at Equifax got fired yesterday. That Hillary Clinton did not win the election in part due to poor computer security. So it's a huge issue out there. I can tell you that there are massive budgets going into this sort of across corporations and governments and everything else. So there's a lot more consciousness about it. I don't think we have all the techniques that we need to deal with it. I can tell you one of the most interesting fields that I see right now is actually applying AI to computer security. And sometimes I feel like I'm in a William Gibson novel when we start talking about this, because people are building artificially intelligent agents that are going to roam the network looking for bad guys. But it's the sophistication of the people attacking you, trying to get at your secrets, your money, your identity. It's incredibly sophisticated, it's incredibly big business, and you need to take it very seriously. It's really a huge deal. And with IoT, it literally can become more and more life and death, not just I get fired.
So I have a fun question that I like to ask. How many times a day does Citrix try to get hacked, or even IBM? Do you guys know? And I talked to Jeff Smith, the former CIO of IBM, who gave me a scary number. And even the CIO of GE. Like, how many times, just so people can get context, how many times a day are people trying to hack something like a Citrix? Is it once a day, 5 times a day?
No, it's hundreds a day.
Hundreds a day. So literally hundreds of hacks a day you're fending off. For 365 days a year, so you're dealing with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of attacks. And at IBM and at GE, they were telling me it's like 10,000 a day.
Yeah, I mean, you can try this experiment at home if you're a geek, okay? Buy a domain, put up a web page, and there's a little bit of open source software you can stick in there to give you kind of, who's visiting your homepage. And pretty shortly, you'll find a series of bots from IP addresses that you don't know where.
Without even promoting the domain.
Without even trying to, you're in the domain registry system. Eventually, someone's going to find you, and this is when there's no value there. It's just a web page, So yes, I think the question was, are we ready? If any company ever thinks they're ready, they fail. Because the one thing that you have to do is constantly beware. I think that's sort of the game. And we have a huge division that focuses on security at IBM. This is I'd say one of the it's a fast-growing piece of our portfolio for this reason alone. It's really critical, even more critical today.
Is it possible to even be that secure, right? Because even at Equifax and all these companies, like, there are smart PhDs, top-level grads from the best universities. Like, these are some smart people that are building out these infrastructures and systems, and they're still getting hacked.
So one of the things that is the most incredible thing about the Equifax scenario to people who've looked at it is not that they did get hacked, because it does happen, right? There's so many places it can happen from. It's the appearance that they had no plan for what happened
afterwards.
when, I mean, clearly that was the most extreme case of let's not tell anyone, let's try to hide it, let's sell our stock. But, right, but.
All the right moves.
The assumption should be on the part of every corporation is you will be hacked. What are you going to do about it? And you need to build the plans for that in advance. You don't want to be building that under the high stress scenario after it happens. You don't have time to do it then. You need to build those plans in advance. You need to be thinking about that. And maybe it won't happen the way that you thought out, but you put those contingency plans in place. And so you must be constantly vigilant. You must have those defenses up so that you're not the first guy to get hacked. But you need to have the plans in place for what does happen because
so assume it'll happen and be prepared for
out
it.
there. Absolutely.
Great. Next question. Oh man, we got a lot.
Hi. There's been a lot of talk around the impact of technology, space, and the culture at work, right? But we've been mostly focusing on knowledge work and the type of work that we all perform in this room. Can you develop a little bit on what are your thoughts about the potential and the possibilities of impact of technology and space and the new trends on blue-collar workers and frontline employees around the world? And I don't mean just like displacement of jobs, but actually what is the potential of all these people having a supercomputer in their pocket, being networked between each other and communicating and in a way becoming knowledge workers?
So people, this might be farmers or so not the typical knowledge worker, just so people can.
Right. I mean, I think we're at a fascinating place with compute in people's pockets. There's a recent article on someone who's trying to figure out how to find out if a farm in Africa has been sort of infected with a particular kind of disease. And so they were like, we'll do drones and we'll fly them out there, and I'm like, that's awesome. And someone came with a bright idea. You know what? They have bicycles there. Everyone has a phone there. We'll just have them bike down and take a few pictures, and that was it. So I think you don't necessarily have to overcomplicate the answer. And so, but I think with these breakthroughs, essentially everyone has a massive, at least one, if not two, IoT equivalent devices, in their pockets, at all the time. And sometimes in third world countries, they've actually leapfrogged us by a generation of these devices. So they're ready for business there, already. So I think that's an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a big question about what's a blue collar worker and what's a knowledge worker at this point, right? You think of a farmer as your quintessential blue collar. Man, the amount of technology that goes into farming now.
Yeah, it's amazing.
IoT devices everywhere on the
Sensors
farmland
on the
measuring water content and sun content and all these other things. So I think it does impact not just the software industry. I think it impacts industries broadly, and that'll be everything from farming to fast food to manufacturing.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I think technology can create a lot of opportunity, but the problem is we need to make sure that people have the technology and the connectivity. Because if you don't have those, I think that's when you really start to get in trouble, right? You don't have access to the resources, you don't have access to the web, and then technology just comes to displace you, and there's no resources that you have at your disposal to take any action. So I think that the connectivity that we can provide to people around the world, the more connectivity, the better. The more mobile devices, the more things that we can give to traditional blue-collar workers, the more the potential will be for them to be able to continue to thrive and grow. So I was told one more question. Last question. Who gets the last question?
I get the last question.
Oh. Make it a good one. No pressure.
It has to do with diversity, which hasn't been mentioned yet. When I read the Chronicles business section, it's always about problems with diversity or the benefits of diversity. So I'd like to hear some comments from our esteemed speakers who've done a wonderful job on what they think about making your organizations more diverse.
Yeah, I mean, this is, for us, it's it's part of our philosophy at IBM is to be diverse, whether it's, gender, ethnicity, geography. I mean, we're very conscious about it. And in just a personal sort of experience here, I found that, diverse teams actually work really well together. I have a team in Dublin. And when I visited them, I thought, hey, this is just going to be Irish. Well, it turns out that it's pulled a lot of people from all over the globe into Dublin because it's now this thriving little mini Silicon Valley there. And I think they have one of the most diverse populations I've ever had the privilege of leading. And they produce some of the best, most well thought out designs that I've seen in my group too, just because they all bring different perspectives. I think that is the unique part about diversity, is people coming from different backgrounds, bringing their different perspectives to solving a problem. You get a very multifaceted solution. So I think that's how we view it.
Yeah, so maybe I'll be a little controversial, but I think the industry in Silicon Valley and the software industry in particular has a big problem here, in particular with sexism. And we see it every day. The number of women software developers is incredibly small compared to the proportion that you should have. There are things that go all the way down the educational system from very early on, where we fork girls away from those things. And it goes, frankly, all the way up into the way that we do interviewing and team building as an industry, where I think we really need to address that. And you look at things like the Google memo that came out recently, and I think it's just, if you read it, take it at face value that it's indicative of what a lot of people are thinking. And I think it's something that the industry needs to tackle head on.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention about diversity, just personal story. So when I wrote my book on the future of work in 2014, I was talking to my wife. We share a home office together, and as I was writing the book, she said, you should include a section on women in your book. I said, what? Why? I was very naive and ignorant. And she said, it's very different for women in the workplace than it is for men. And I didn't know anything about this stuff, so I heard some stories here and then. I said, how different could it really be? And so I started doing some research on this, and basically, through all this research, there's now a whole big section and like several chapters around women in management in the book that was out in 2014. And I think there's a big education problem. A lot of people, myself included, just had no clue about what this meant. And today, diversity, of course, is not just men versus women. It's cognitive diversity, race, culture. It's all sorts of different things, right? And I think it's in the best interest of everybody, right? I looked at 10 environments that shape corporate culture, and diversity was one of the things that employees care about most. And it makes sense, right? You don't want everybody that looks alike, that thinks alike, that believes in the same things, trying to solve your company's biggest problems, or trying to identify new opportunities for you. You want people with different perspectives that can come together to solve challenges and to identify new opportunities for you. So the employees care about it and value it, and I think it also greatly benefits the organization. I think more people just need to be more aware of what diversity means and the pros of why this is so crucial and what companies are doing. So I think that's it. We went a couple minutes over, so thank you all for your fantastic questions, and thank you to the panelists for participating.
Thank you.
Just a second. Just 1 second, Steve. Thank you very much. I'd like to echo that. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us so candidly. We really appreciate it. We are just about to move into our next session, but first we must have the ceremonial presentation of the speaker T-shirt. Here it comes. Please wear that in very good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.